Wild Blue Yonder is undoubtedly the strongest of the RTD2 episodes so far, and that may seem a little strange coming from me given that it's the one where everyone is making comparisons to Midnight, and my main recurring criticism of the current era of Doctor Who is it being derivative of what's gone before. The thing is though, while there are certainly similarities between the episodes, like the creeping sense of paranoia and a mysterious alien that mimics and assimilates human form, I would argue there is still more than enough to differentiate the story and give it its own unique identity. The episode has a rather bizarre and disjointed opening with a cameo from Isaac Newton which honestly just feels jarring and out of place. It clashes tonally with the rest of the story, and as far as I can tell only exists to set up a recurring joke that isn't even particularly funny. At least I assume it's meant to be a joke, and no, I'm not going to be doing the thing that every reviewer is doing and referring to gravity as mavity for the rest of the video. Things get even more strange with the subsequent conversation about Isaac Newton being hot, which is very random and arguably somewhat uncomfortable given that in reality there is evidence to suggest that Isaac Newton was repulsed by the idea of sex and intimacy. Isaac Newton is portrayed by Nathaniel Curtis, who is a British Indian actor. And that's probably by far the least confusing thing about all of this. The story actually gets going properly once the Doctor and Donna land on an abandoned spaceship at the very edge of the universe where a robot is walking very slowly down an enormous corridor and an airlock opened and then closed again 3 years earlier. And this is where some of the similarities but also the differences from the aforementioned Midnight become apparent. While that episode draws a lot of its suspense from the claustrophobic setting, with Wild Blue Yonder it's very much the opposite. It's at this point that I want to introduce the concept of liminal space, although I feel I need to clarify what I actually mean by that since the term has become so diluted by internet culture to the point where it can be used to describe just about anything vaguely creepy. The word liminal actually originates from the Latin word limen, meaning threshold, and traditionally it refers to transitional spaces, examples of which could include a shopping mall or a train station or a stairwell in a hotel, or indeed a corridor on a spaceship, basically anywhere you would normally expect to see movement. Because we associate these places with activity, the idea of them being abandoned and empty is unsettling, especially because we don't usually get the opportunity to stop and take in our surroundings when in such locations. The prime example of using liminal space to generate suspense for me will always be the video game Portal, which I do intend to talk about at some point, but a lot of the creepiness of Wild Blue Yonder also comes from the liminal. For all that I've been critical in the past of Murray Gold's bombast, his score for this episode shows a refreshing amount of restraint, which definitely contributes to the feeling of emptiness and isolation. It also helps that the TARDIS has abandoned the Doctor and Donna after ominously playing the titular Wild Blue Yonder, an event which, if this were the Chibnall era, might have been brushed off as inconsequential. Here, though, it is treated with severity and there is a real sense of danger. When they have the exchange about being trillions of years away from Donna's home, you really feel it. Speaking of the Chibnall era and things actually having emotional weight and consequences, it's interesting to see the flux getting referenced later on. I appreciate that the fact half the universe was seemingly destroyed in that story is finally being addressed, but it is admittedly a little jarring seeing the Doctor suddenly care so much about it now after cheerily carrying on like business as usual for the previous 4 episodes. Because even if it was a case of the Doctor bottling up their emotions, that still could have been conveyed to the audience, and it wasn't. But that brings us to the not things, and unfortunately this is where the episode kind of lets itself down. Not because the monster is a terrible concept necessarily, and it was a smart idea to have David Tennant and Catherine Tate as the sole cast members, furthering the sense of isolation, though that again makes me question why the random Isaac Newton cameo. Sorry, I'm not gonna let that go. But it's more the missed opportunity. As pointed out by Mr. TARDIS, the special effects used with the Doctor and Donna's duplicates have similarities with art produced by generative AI, what with the proportions being off, the giant hands and knees in random places. Coupled to that, you have the fact that the Not Things are only antagonists in the first place because they have assimilated the universe's desire for war and hatred. And you know, one of the biggest concerns about artificial intelligence, aside from those shouting about art theft, is that AI will replicate all of the worst aspects of humanity, for example, discriminating against job applicants based on race, gender, and so on. As someone who has been explicitly accused in the past of being quote-unquote obsessed with social commentary, I am cautious of disliking a piece of media simply for not being what I wanted it to be. But this really feels like the pieces were there for the story to address a topical subject matter, and yet it just doesn't. It kind of reminds me of how Orphan 55 has this premise where rich people essentially get to stay at a resort on a post-apocalyptic Earth where they can pretend that everything is fine and global warming didn't happen, and then the concluding message of the episode is just climate change bad. Again, you could argue like Stu Bagfall did with Orphan 55 that these creative choices were intentional to some degree, but social commentary on a particular subject matter tends to be strongest as a general rule if you actually address the thing you are commenting on directly. If you're going to talk about AI, then talk about AI. Otherwise, you should maybe tell a different story. That being said though, the not things do make for an effective monster and are in keeping with the creepy vibe of the episode. I particularly like the way they are first introduced, and the deliberately disorienting way the two scenes are edited, cutting between the Doctor and Donna and their respective duplicates, making it unclear what's going on. Their plan to copy the Doctor and Donna's form in order to steal the TARDIS and escape into the universe is very reminiscent of John Carpenter's The Thing, and it is apparent that Russell T Davies is drawing influence from various classic sci-fi horror movies with this one. The result is an episode that is chilling and suspenseful, and while it is similar in tone to Midnight, the way it gets there is quite different. Unfortunately, if we are making comparisons with that story, Wild Blue Yonder is definitely the weaker of the two, because of its lack of focus. And yes, I am mainly talking about the random stuff with Isaac Newton again, which still baffles me as to what it is even doing here. One thing that I can't fault though, and which I have to mention, is the cameo of Wilfred Mott. Seeing the reunion with Tennant's Doctor is just such a warm, nostalgic hug, and we're very lucky that this footage could be recorded before Bernard Cribbins sadly passed away. I'm Midnight, and I travel in time and space. And trains.